The thing you have to understand is that I chose that apartment for the quiet. It sounds ironic now, I know, but at the time, it felt like a sanctuary. A fortress of silence. After the last box was carted in and the sweaty moving guys finally left, I closed the heavy front door, leaned my back against it, and just listened. Nothing. For the first time in what felt like years, there was just the gentle hum of my own bloodstream in my ears, the sound I was getting far too familiar with. The building was an old brick pre-war thing, the kind with thick walls that had probably absorbed decades of arguments, laughter, and secrets. My place was on the ground floor, a detail that made moving in a breeze. It had these gorgeous, dark wood floors that groaned and creaked in a way that felt like history, not damage. A big window in the living room looked out onto a sad little shared courtyard, but even that was quiet, just a few neglected rose bushes and a stone birdbath. It was perfect, a place where my world, which was steadily growing quieter on its own, wouldn't be assaulted by the noise of the city. A place where I could work. My name is Anne, and I'm a freelance graphic designer. My job is my eyes. Logos, branding kits, website layouts, it's all visual, which, I guess, is a small mercy. A few months before the move, I'd been in a small, sterile room, the kind with posters of the inner ear on the wall that no one ever actually looks at. The audiologist, a kind woman with a tired smile, had pushed a graph across the desk towards me. It looked like two ski slopes, a sharp, sad decline. Progressive bilateral sensory neural hearing loss, she'd said, the medical jargon feeling cold and foreign in my ears, even though I could still hear her perfectly fine then. It means the nerve pathways from your inner ears to your brain are, well, they're degrading. It's a gradual process. We don't know how fast or how far it will go. Gradual, that was the word that stuck with me. Not a sudden, violent deafness, but a slow, creeping fade. Like someone was turning down the volume on my life, 1 decibel at a time. The first thing to go was the high-pitched stuff. Bird song, the sizzle of onions in a pan. Then, it started creeping into conversations. I found myself leaning in, asking people to repeat themselves, pretending I'd heard a joke and laughing a beat too late. The worst part was the tinnitus, the phantom ringing that the doctor explained was my brain's way of filling in the new silence. A high-pitched, constant ee that was a permanent resident in my head. So, this apartment, this quiet, ground-floor haven, was my answer to that. A controlled environment, a place where I wouldn't have to strain to separate a neighbor's TV from a real conversation. A place where the silence I created myself wouldn't be competing with the silence my own body was forcing on me. The first few days were bliss. I unpacked my life from cardboard boxes, creating a little nest for myself. I set up my big monitor and drawing tablet by the window, where the afternoon light was best. My books found a home on a new white shelf. The old floorboards creaked under my feet as I padded back and forth, from the small kitchen to the living room, a mug of tea in my hand. The sounds were all mine, the clink of ceramic, the rustle of packing paper, the soft clicks of my keyboard. The promised quiet was real. The thick walls muffled the city into a distant, ignorable hum, and the tenant upstairs, if there even was one, must have been a ghost. I felt a sense of peace, of control, that I hadn't felt since that day in the doctor's office. I was finally home. The first time I heard it was on the third night. I was in bed, book resting on my chest, the city outside having finally exhaled and fallen asleep. This was always the worst time for my tinnitus. In the absolute stillness, the ringing in my ears would crank itself up to an almost unbearable pitch. It was a lonely, isolating sound. But this was different. Beneath the familiar high-pitched whine in my own head, there was something else. A new sound. It was low, a deep, bassy hum. It was so subtle at first that I thought I was imagining it. You know, like when you're in a silent room and you start to hear the thrum of your own heart. But this wasn't that. It was external. It was a steady, monotonous vibration. VMMMMMMMMMMMM. Annoyance was my first reaction. I'd paid a premium for this peace and quiet. I swung my legs out of bed, the bare skin of my feet meeting the cool, smooth wood of the floor. I stood still in the middle of the bedroom, turning my head, trying to triangulate the source. It wasn't the fridge. I'd bought a new one specifically because it was advertised as library quiet. It wasn't the AC unit, it wasn't even on. I walked into the living room, the sound seeming to follow me. No, not follow me. It was just there. Everywhere, a constant, low-frequency pressure on my eardrums. It wasn't loud. In fact, if there had been any other noise in the apartment, a fan or some music, I never would have noticed it. But in the profound silence I had so desperately craved, it was the only thing I could hear, other than the screaming static in my own brain. I pressed my ear against the wall I shared with the hallway. Nothing, just the cold, solid feel of old plaster. I tried the wall to the adjoining apartment. Silence. Then, on a whim, I knelt down. The floorboards were cool against my knees. I hesitated for a second, feeling a little foolish, then I pressed my ear flat against the wood. The hum was stronger here. It wasn't just a sound anymore, it was a physical sensation. A faint, almost imperceptible vibration that traveled through the floorboards, into the bones of my skull. VMMMMMMMMMMM. It was deep and resonant, like a massive engine idling somewhere far, far below me. The old pipes, I told myself. It has to be the building's old plumbing system or the boiler in the basement. Old buildings make weird noises. It's part of their charm. I went back to bed, pulling the covers up to my chin. But the sound was still there, a low, persistent hum that seemed to be vibrating up through the legs of my bed frame. It was like trying to sleep with a cell phone on vibrate lying next to your head, except this vibration was everywhere and nowhere all at once. My tinnitus screeched in the high end, and this new hum held down the bass. Together, they formed a horrible, dissonant chord, a private symphony of madness playing just for me. I decided, then and there, that it was just a new, fun symptom of my hearing loss. My brain, deprived of real auditory input, was just making stuff up. First the high-pitched ringing, now a low-pitched humming. Great. Another thing to add to the list of ways my own body was betraying me. It was a depressing thought, but somehow, it was less scary than the alternative, that the sound was real. The next day, I was determined to ignore it. I put on my headphones, blasted my work playlist, and dove into a branding project for a new yoga studio. The music, a mix of ambient synths and gentle electronic beats, easily drowned out the hum. Problem solved. For hours, I worked in blissful, curated noise. I only took the headphones off to make more coffee, and in those brief moments, I noticed it. The hum, still there, a faithful, patient companion in the quiet. VMMMMMMMMMM. It seemed to be getting a tiny bit more noticeable, or maybe my brain was just getting better at isolating it. I shook my head, put my headphones back on, and cranked up the volume. That night was worse. I was exhausted. I'd stared at a screen for 10 hours, and all I wanted was to fall into a deep, dreamless sleep. But as soon as my head hit the pillow and the silence of the night descended again, the hum returned. It was like an appointment it refused to miss. VMMMMMMMMMMM. It was maddening. I tried everything. I turned on a white noise app on my phone, but the app's sound felt thin and artificial compared to the deep, resonant thrum from below. The hum didn't get masked, it just harmonized with the fake rain sounds, turning them into a muddy, unsettling drone. Tossing and turning, I felt a rising tide of frustration and a strange, creeping anxiety. This place was supposed to be my refuge. It was supposed to be quiet. Then I remembered the gift my brother had given me for my birthday. A pair of ridiculously expensive, top-of-the-line noise-canceling headphones. The kind pilots use. I'd thanked him, but privately thought they were overkill. Now, they felt like my last hope. I fumbled for them on my nightstand, my hands shaking slightly with a mixture of anger and desperation. They were sleek and black, cool to the touch. I settled back against my pillows and slipped them over my ears. I pressed the small power button, and the world vanished. The effect was instantaneous and profound. The high-pitched shriek of my tinnitus was snuffed out, sucked into a vacuum. The faint rumble of a late-night truck passing on the street a block away disappeared. It was the deepest, most absolute silence I had experienced in years. It was a black velvet void of sound. For a moment, I just lay there, basking in the glorious, perfect nothing. I felt my tensed muscles begin to relax. A slow, grateful smile spread across my face. Peace. At last, I closed my eyes, ready for sleep to take me. And that's when I felt it. The sound was gone, yes. The headphones had done their job perfectly. I couldn't hear the hum anymore, but I could feel it. It wasn't a sound wave hitting my eardrums. It was something else, a vibration, incredibly faint but undeniably there. It was coming up from the mattress, through my pillow, and into the back of my skull. It was a physical presence. a low, rhythmic pulse that seemed to beat in time with something deep inside the building's foundation. My eyes snapped open in the dark. The smile was gone. My heart started to pound, a frantic, panicked drum against my ribs. This wasn't in my head. This wasn't tinnitus. This was real, and it was coming from right underneath me. Sleep, of course, was out of the question after that. The realization that the vibration was a physical thing, something that could travel through solid matter and into my bones, changed everything. The flimsy explanation I clung to, that this was all just a neurological quirk, a new and exciting symptom of my failing ears, crumbled to dust. This was real, and it was in my apartment. The next few days were a special kind of hell. The hum became my unwanted roommate. It wasn't loud, you have to understand that. It was just constant. During the day, I could mostly tune it out. I'd put on my headphones, turn up my ambient work playlists, and lose myself in color palettes and font pairings. But it was always there, waiting in the wings. In the brief moments of silence when I took my headphones off to get a coffee, or when I paused to think, there it was. VMMMMMMMMMM. A low, insistent presence. It was like having a fly in the room. You can ignore it for a while, but you never truly forget it's there, and the moment it lands on you, your skin crawls. My apartment, once a sanctuary of quiet, now felt like a cage I was sharing with a humming, invisible beast. My work started to suffer. I'd be in the middle of aligning a logo, my eyes burning from staring at the screen, and I'd feel it. A subtle vibration through the soles of my feet on the floorboards. It was distracting in a way I can't properly explain. It frayed my nerves, pulling at the edges of my concentration until I felt like a mess of loose threads. Sleep became a transaction. I'd wear those noise-canceling headphones to bed every night, but while they blocked out the sound, they couldn't stop the feeling. I'd lie there in the artificial, pressurized silence, feeling the faint, deep thrum coming up through the mattress, a persistent reminder of the thing under my floor. I started waking up exhausted, with a tension headache and a sour, metal taste in my mouth. After a week of this, a week of feeling like I was slowly being vibrated apart at a molecular level, I decided I needed proof. I needed to prove to myself that I wasn't just completely losing my mind. The plan was simple. I was going to record it. My phone had a decent microphone. I waited until late Tuesday night, when the city was at its quietest. The hum, as always, seemed to be at its most pronounced in the dead of night, a loyal anchor in the sea of silence. I opened the voice memo app. The little audio level meter on the screen was a flat, dead line. Perfect. I knelt down, my knees cracking in the silence, and placed the phone flat on the floor, right in the center of the living room where the vibe felt strongest. I pressed record. The little red timer started ticking upwards. I left it there for 10 minutes. I sat on my couch, my legs pulled up to my chest, and just watched the phone like it was some kind of scientific instrument meant to validate my sanity. I didn't move. I barely breathed. The hum was there, a constant D-flat note against my eardrums, a buzz against the floor. The phone had to be picking it up. It had to be. After 10 agonizingly long minutes, I crept over and stopped the recording. My heart was thumping. This was it, the moment of truth. I picked up the phone, my hand trembling slightly, and pressed play. I heard nothing, just silence, a dead, flat, digital nothing. The kind of silence that has a faint, electronic hiss to it. No hum, no vibration, no deep, resonant thrum. I cranked the volume all the way up, pressing the phone right against my ear. All I got was that empty hiss, the sound of a microphone recording absolutely nothing at all. I tried again. This time I put the phone in the corner where the weird, musty smell I'd started to notice was strongest. I even tried wrapping it in a towel to see if that would somehow isolate the vibration. 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20, each time the result was the same. The playback was a featureless void of silence. It was infuriating. It was like trying to take a picture of a ghost. The evidence of its presence was everywhere, but the moment you tried to capture it, it vanished. The feeling of dread that washed over me was cold and sharp. What if my friends were right? What if it really was all in my head, a complex auditory hallucination so vivid it came with phantom vibrations? The loneliness of that thought was terrifying. I couldn't take it anymore. I needed to talk to a real person. I dialed my sister, Sarah. She's a nurse, practical and grounded. If anyone could talk me down, it was her. She picked up on the third ring. Hey, Annie, everything okay? It's kind of late. Hey, Sarah, sorry. I just needed to talk. I tried to keep my voice steady, but it came out thin and reedy. "What's wrong? You sound weird." And so I told her. I told her everything. About the low hum that started on the third night. About how it wasn't tinnitus. About the vibration in the floor, the headphones, the failed recordings. I tried to sound as rational and clinical as I could, like I was describing a faulty appliance, not a haunting. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When she finally spoke, her voice was laced with a kind of gentle, professional concern that made my stomach clench. "Annie, honey," she started, and I knew what was coming. "Have you been under a lot of stress lately? With the move and the ahem, you know, the diagnosis?" "It's not stress, Sarah," I said, a little too sharply. "I'm not imagining it. It's real. I can feel it." Okay, I believe you," she said, in the exact tone of someone who absolutely does not believe you. "But you have to admit, it sounds a little unusual. Your brain is going through a lot right now. The audiologist said that as your hearing changes, your brain might try to fill in the gaps. Tinnitus is one way, maybe this is just another way, a low-frequency version of it. But I can feel it," I insisted, my voice cracking. "It vibrates the floor. The mind is a powerful thing, Annie. It can create physical sensations. It's called a psychosomatic response. Have you been sleeping well? Eating properly? Maybe you should make a follow-up appointment with Dr. Evans, just to be safe." I felt a wave of despair wash over me. She wasn't listening, she was diagnosing. She had already placed my experience into a neat little box labeled, "symptom of a known condition." I was no longer a reliable narrator of my own life. I was a patient. "Yeah," I said, my voice flat. "Yeah, maybe I'll do that." The call ended with the kind of gentle, worried sign-off you give to someone you think is losing their grip. "Get some rest, okay? And call me tomorrow." I hung up and tossed the phone onto the couch. I felt more alone than ever before. The silence in the apartment pressed in on me, and underneath it, the hum continued its tireless vigil. VMMMMMMMMMM. It felt like it was mocking me. The world had abandoned me to it. My own ears were betraying me, and now, the one person I thought would believe me was chalking it all up to a dying nerve in my head. I was completely, utterly on my own. That was the night it changed. I had given up on sleep. I was sitting cross-legged on the floor in the living room, in the dark, just listening. I don't know why, maybe it was a form of surrender. If I couldn't fight it or prove it, maybe I could just coexist with it. The hum was there, a low, steady drone. But as I sat there, focusing on it, I realized something was different. It wasn't a continuous VMMMMMMMMMM anymore. It had stopped being a steady note. It was pulsing. It was a slow, deliberate rhythm. A deep, resonant thrum, then a second of absolute silence, then the thrum again. Thrum. Thrum mm. Thrum mm. It was like a gigantic, slow-beating heart, or a broken metronome, stuck on the slowest possible setting. It was a pattern, deliberate, measured. My blood ran cold. A random mechanical noise is one thing. A faulty boiler, old pipes, whatever. You can explain that away. But a pattern, a rhythm, that implies something different. That implies a signal. It implies intent. I stayed there for what must have been an hour, motionless in the dark, just listening to the slow, stupid Morse code from below. Thrum. Pause. Thrum mm. Pause. Thrum mm. It was hypnotic. It was terrifying. I tried to find some logic in it. Maybe it was just the boiler cycling on and off? But the timing was too precise, too regular. In my desperation for peace, I'd been trying to practice some mindfulness exercises my therapist had suggested ages ago. "Focus on your breath," she'd said. "Acknowledge external sounds without judgment and let them pass." It seemed like a sick joke now, but I tried it. I closed my eyes. Breathe in, breathe out. I focused on the strange rhythm from below, trying to treat it like a passing car or a distant siren. Thrum. Acknowledge. Pause. Let go. Thrum. Acknowledge. Pause. I fell into the rhythm of it. The world narrowed to that simple, binary pattern, sound and silence. My breathing synced with it. In the deep, velvety quiet of the pause between one thrum and the next, my mind was completely still. And in that stillness, I heard it. It wasn't part of the thrum. It was something else, riding on the edge of the silence, so faint it was barely there. It was like trying to hear a whisper in a storm. A stretched, distorted, impossibly low sound. A human sound. It was one syllable. Down. That single word, down, broke something inside me. It wasn't just a sound anymore. A sound is passive. A sound is random. A boiler kicking on, the refrigerator humming, the wind blowing through a crack in the window frame. This was different. This was a word. Words have meaning. They have intent. And this one had been delivered in the dead, black silence between two throbbing beats from under my floor. I didn't move from my spot on the floor for what felt like hours. I just sat there, cross-legged in the dark, my spine rigid. My own breathing sounded ridiculously loud, a desperate, shallow panting in the oppressive quiet of the apartment. I was trying to convince myself I had imagined it. My brain, in its desperate attempt to make sense of the rhythmic thrumming, had simply created a word out of noise. Apophenia, that's what it's called. Seeing patterns where there are none. Like seeing faces in the clouds or hearing messages in static. It had to be that. It was the only explanation that didn't involve me completely losing my mind or being in a very, very bad situation. But I knew, deep down, in that cold, honest part of myself that I usually try to ignore, I knew I hadn't imagined it. The sound had been too distinct, too shaped. It wasn't a phantom echo in my tinnitus-plagued ears. It felt like it had come from outside of me. From below. The next morning, the world felt tilted, unsafe. The sun came up, traffic started its daily rumble. My neighbors upstairs began their routine of dropping what sounded like bowling balls on their floor. But the normalcy of it all felt like a thin veil stretched over something awful. I made coffee, my hands shaking so badly that grounds spilled all over the counter. I sat at my computer, staring at a half-finished logo design, but the colors all seemed dull and lifeless. All I could think about was the floor beneath my feet. Solid-looking hardwood, warm under the morning sun, but I knew what was underneath. A low, patient hum. An impossible whisper. The pulsing rhythm was gone. The hum was back to its steady, monotonous drone. VMMMMMMMMM. It was almost a relief. Almost. But now, knowing what it was capable of, the steady hum was no longer annoying, it was menacing. It felt like it was waiting. It was later that afternoon that I first noticed the other thing. I was pacing. I couldn't sit still. I walked from the kitchen to the living room, then to the window, then back. A tight, frantic energy was coiling in my gut. As I walked across the living room for the dozenth time, I felt it. A change. It was so subtle I almost missed it. Like the way you can feel the pressure change in the air right before a storm. The vibration under my feet, the one that had become a miserable fact of my life, seemed to get just a tiny bit stronger as I passed one specific corner of the room. The corner near the window, the one that always seemed a little darker than the rest of the apartment. I stopped dead in the middle of the room. My heart started to hammer against my ribs. No way. I was imagining it. I was hypersensitive now, looking for threats everywhere. My mind was playing tricks on me. But I had to know. I took a slow, deliberate step back. The vibration under the soles of my feet seemed to lessen, returning to its baseline thrum. I waited, holding my breath. Then, I took one step forward, towards the corner. It was there, a faint but undeniable increase in the intensity of the vibration. It was like walking towards a speaker playing a very low bass note. The closer I got, the more I could feel it in my bones. A cold sweat broke out on my forehead. This wasn't in my head. A psychosomatic response doesn't get stronger or weaker depending on where you stand in a room. This was a physical phenomenon. It was real, and it was reacting to me. The thought was so violating it almost made me gag. I wasn't just a passive resident living above a noisy pipe. I was an object of interest. I was being monitored. I spent the next hour engaged in the most terrifying scientific experiment of my life. I'd walk towards the corner, and the thrumming would crescendo, a low, guttural vibration that seemed to travel up my legs. I'd stand right over the spot, and I could feel it buzzing against the bones in my feet. Then I'd walk away, towards the kitchen, and it would recede, fading back into a background hum. It was consistent. It was repeatable. It was proof. I proved to myself that I wasn't crazy, and in doing so, I had stumbled into a reality far more terrifying than madness. This thing, whatever it was, knew where I was. And then came the smell. It started a day or two later. A faint, unpleasant odor. At first, I thought it was the trash. I took it out, but the smell remained. It was a sour, musty smell, like damp laundry that had been forgotten in the machine for a week. Or spoiled potatoes. It was organic and deeply unpleasant. And, of course, it was strongest in that same godforsaken corner of the room. The hum, the vibration, the whisper, and now a smell. Every sense was under assault. My sanctuary had become a sensory torture chamber. I couldn't take it anymore. The lack of sleep, the constant, nerve-shredding hum, the knowledge that something was aware of me under the floorboards, it was all becoming too much. My sister thought I was losing it. My friends would, too. There was only one person left to call, one person who had a responsibility to deal with this. The landlord, Mr. Gable. He was a gruff, impatient man in his late 60s who always looked like I was personally wasting his valuable time. But the smell was my ticket. A weird noise is subjective. A smell is a fact. He showed up the next afternoon, letting himself in with his master key before I could even get to the door, which did nothing to calm my nerves. "All right, what's this about a smell?" he asked, not as a question but as an accusation. He stood in the entryway, his hands on his hips. "Hi, Mr. Gable. Thanks for coming," I said, my voice sounding weak. "It's over here." I led him to the corner. The smell was particularly bad today, a thick, cloying odor that seemed to hang in the air. I watched his face for a reaction. He took a theatrical sniff. "Yeah," he grunted, "smells like an old building." "It's more than that," I insisted. "It's a really strong, sour smell. And there's a constant noise, a vibration, right from this spot." He bent down, with the pained groan of a man who resented physical effort. He put his ear near the floor for a fraction of a second, then straightened up, brushing dust from his knees. "Don't hear nothin'. You have to listen for it," I pleaded. "It's a low hum, and you can feel it." He gave me a look. It was a look I was getting used to, a mixture of pity and annoyance. The look you give a troublesome, overly emotional woman. The look my sister had given me over the phone. "Miss," he said, and the way he said the word made me feel like a child. "This is a 100-year-old building. You got pipes under here. You got steam lines. You got electrical conduits running to every apartment in this line. The whole place hums and smells. It's the character of the building." He said the word character like it was a disease. "It's probably the main sewer line. It gets a little funky when the weather's damp. Nothing I can do about it. But it's just this one spot," I said, desperation creeping into my voice. "And it seems to get louder when I walk over it." He actually took a step back from me then. His eyes narrowed. "Look, lady," I checked. "There's nothing leaking. Nothing's broken. It's an old building. Some people just aren't cut out for old buildings." He was looking at me, but he wasn't seeing me. He was seeing a problem. A neurotic young woman who was probably stressed out and imagining things. He had already decided. I felt a wave of cold, hard despair wash over me. There would be no help. Not from him. Not from anyone. I was on my own. Utterly and completely on my own with the thing under my floor. "Yeah," I said, my voice flat and defeated. "Okay, thanks for stopping by." He grunted and saw himself out, leaving me standing alone in my apartment. The silence he left behind was profound. And underneath it, the hum continued its tireless vigil. VMMMMMMMMMM. It knew I was alone. I felt like it was pleased. I was trapped. To move out would be to admit defeat, to admit that I was crazy and couldn't handle it. To stay felt like signing my own death warrant. That night sealed it. I was trying to work, trying to reclaim some small patch of normalcy. I had my headphones on, music blasting, trying to create a bubble of my own sound against the invasive hum. I was tired. So tired. My hands felt clumsy. As I reached for a reference book on my desk, my elbow knocked over a cup holding my pens. They scattered across the floor with a series of sharp, plastic clatters. One of them, a black fineliner, rolled away from the desk and came to a stop right in the center of the problem corner. I sighed, took off my headphones, and slid off my chair. The world went from the loud, controlled chaos of my music to the quiet, menacing thrum of the room. It was always a shock. I got on my hands and knees to retrieve the pen. As I crawled over, the vibration grew stronger, buzzing up through the bones in my hands and my knees. When I reached the pen, my head was only inches from the floorboards. The proximity changed everything. The sound was no longer just a directionless hum filling the room. Here, right against the wood, it had texture. It had layers. It was a low, guttural, electronic drone, but there was something else inside it. That impossibly low frequency I'd heard before, the component that felt like a human voice. It was clearer now, sharper. It was right there. I froze, my hand hovering over the pen. I tilted my head, pressing my ear closer to the floor, as if trying to listen through a door. The wood was cool against my skin. The vibration was so intense it made my teeth ache. And I listened. I listened past the hum. I listened into the heart of the sound. And the whisper came again. Not a single, distorted word this time. It wasn't a fragment. It was a phrase, a command, spoken slowly with a terrible, patient clarity that cut right through the noise and into the center of my brain. Look. A pause filled only with the deep, resonant vibration. Me. The words hung in the air long after the vibration faded back to its baseline hum. Look me. It wasn't a plea. It wasn't a request. It was a command delivered with the flat, dead certainty of a hypnotist. I didn't get up off the floor. I just knelt there, my hands flat on the wooden planks, my cheek pressed against the cool, vibrating surface. The silence in the room was a lie. The real sound, the one that mattered, was the one thrumming up through the joists and into my bones. Something broke in me then. Not fear, not terror. That had been my constant companion for weeks. This was something else. It was a cold, hard snap of clarity. I finally understood that this wasn't something that was happening to me, it was something that was being done to me. There was intent, there was intelligence, and my sanity was the battleground. I realized, with a despair so complete it was almost calm, that if I let myself be seen as crazy, I would lose. Whatever was under the floor would win. So, I decided to stop acting like a victim and start acting like a scientist. I got up, my knees cracking in protest. I went to my desk, pulled out a fresh, black moleskin notebook, the kind I use for sketching logo ideas, and a fine-tipped pen. On the first page, I wrote the date and the time. Then, I began to document everything. I was going to build a case for my own sanity. My life shrunk to the four walls of that apartment and the pages of that notebook. Every entry was a small rebellion. 9:17 a.m., hum at baseline, low, steady, A.G. sharp, I think. Felt through the floor, strongest in the living room corner. 11:04 a.m. I walked to the kitchen to make coffee. The vibration spiked as I passed the corner. A definite, measurable increase. The hum became guttural. 1:30 p.m. Sitting at my desk, working. The hum is back to baseline. It seems to be less active when I'm stationary for long periods. 4:42 p.m. Paced across the living room 3 times. 3 spikes in vibration. The third time, I thought I heard a sub-vocalization. A low throb, like a word trying to form but failing. And the smell. Oh, God, the smell. I tried to describe it. Sour, like old potatoes. Damp, musty, like a wet basement. A faint, underlying metallic tang. It was worst in the mornings and seemed to fade a little during the day, only to come back with a vengeance after sunset. I wrote it all down. Timestamps, observations, sensory data. I drew a small map of the apartment, shading the corner with cross-hatching to indicate the epicenter. For 3 days, I was a machine. I barely ate. Sleep was a series of anemic, 30-minute naps on the sofa, as far from the corner as possible. The notebook became my Bible, my proof. It was full of neat, clinical observations. Reading it, no one could say I was hysterical. It was data, it was evidence, and I knew who I had to show it to. My sister, Sarah. She was the most level-headed person I knew. A high school science teacher. She believed in facts, in evidence, in methodology. She loved me. If anyone would take me seriously, it would be her. I called her. My voice was shaky, and I hated myself for it. Hey, Sarah, can we meet? Coffee or something? There's something I need to talk to you about. She must have heard the ragged edge in my voice. Anne, you okay? You sound awful. I'm fine, I lied. Just, can we meet? Please? Somewhere not here. We met the next afternoon at a bright, noisy coffee shop downtown. The place was full of students and the smell of roasted beans and steamed milk. It felt like another planet. I sat there, clutching my notebook to my chest like a shield, waiting for her. When she walked in, her smile was a painful reminder of a normalcy that felt a million miles away. Hey, you, she said, sliding into the booth opposite me and placing a hand over mine. Her hand was warm. Mine felt like ice. You look like you haven't slept in a week. It's been rough, I admitted. Is it your ears? Is the tinnitus getting worse? Concern creased her brow. Genuine, loving concern. That made what I was about to do feel even worse. It's more than that, Sarah. I took a deep breath. Look, I need you to just listen. No interrupting. Just, hear me out. Please. As a scientist, she nodded slowly, her expression serious. I opened the notebook. For the next 10 minutes, I laid out my case. I spoke in a low, even tone, just like I'd rehearsed. I walked her through the timeline, from the initial hum I'd dismissed as tinnitus to the landlord's visit. I showed her the map. I showed her the timestamps of the reactive vibrations. I read her my descriptions of the smell. I tried to present it all as a set of unexplained phenomena demanding investigation. I was logical. I was methodical. I was sane. I watched her face as I spoke. The initial concern slowly melted into a look of profound, aching pity. She wasn't looking at my notebook anymore. She was looking at me. And she wasn't seeing a sister presenting evidence. She was seeing a patient listing symptoms. When I finally finished, my voice raspy, I slid the notebook across the table towards her. See? It's all there. It's real. It's not in my head. She didn't look at it. She just pushed it gently back towards me. And she began, her voice so soft it was almost a whisper. Honey, listen to me. You've been under a tremendous amount of stress. This isn't stress, Sarah, it's... Let me finish, she said, holding up a hand. You got a scary diagnosis. You're losing one of your senses. You moved into a new place all by yourself. You work from home, you're isolated. Do you have any idea what that does to a person's mind? I'm not imagining it, I said, my voice rising. A woman at the next table glanced over. I lowered my voice, my throat tight. The floor is vibrating. There's a smell. It's real. Of course it's real to you, she said, her voice dripping with the kind of placating gentleness you use on a frightened child. The brain is incredibly powerful. The doctor said auditory hallucinations can happen with this kind of hearing loss. Your brain is trying to fill in the silence, and it's latching onto the ambient noise of an old building and building a story around it. A narrative. My hands started to shake. A narrative? Sarah, I heard it speak. It told me to look me. That was a mistake. I saw it in her eyes the second I said it. The last shred of doubt she might have had just vanished. Now, there was only certainty. Her little sister was having a psychotic break. Okay, she said, taking a slow, calming breath. Okay, and, look, I think maybe we should talk to someone. A professional, not an audiologist, a therapist, maybe, someone who can help you develop some coping mechanisms for the anxiety this is causing. The world went quiet, the chatter of the coffee shop, the hiss of the espresso machine, it all faded into a dull roar. All I could see was her face, full of love and fear and a complete and utter lack of belief. She was looking at me but seeing a collection of symptoms. Stress, isolation, auditory hallucinations, paranoia. She had already diagnosed me. The verdict was in. I was crazy. A bitter, hot feeling rose in my chest. It wasn't sadness. It was anger. A terrible, helpless rage. I had presented her with proof, with data, and she had prescribed a shrink. You don't believe me, I said. It wasn't a question. She reached for my hand again. I believe that you are terrified, and I want to help you. But that was the whole point. She couldn't help me. No one could. Because the first step to helping me would be believing me, and no one would ever cross that line. In their world, old pipes and faulty wiring and overworked minds were real. Whispering floors were not. I pulled my hand away and closed the notebook. The snap of the cover felt like a final judgment. I have to go, I said, my voice dead flat. And, wait, please don't be mad. I'm just worried about you. I know, I said, and the awful thing was, I did. I knew she was, which somehow made it all so much worse. I stood up, my legs feeling like they were filled with sand. I left her sitting there in the bright, warm coffee shop, a little island of sanity in her normal, understandable world. I walked home in a daze. The city bustled around me, cars honking, people laughing, life thrumming with its own indifferent energy. I was an alien, a ghost. I was walking around with this impossible, terrifying secret, and the only two people I had tried to tell, my landlord and my sister, had looked at me like I was a broken thing that needed to be managed. By the time I reached my building, the sky had turned a bruised, ugly gray. The air was thick and heavy with the promise of a storm. Distant thunder rumbled, a low growl that sounded a lot like the thing waiting for me inside. I let myself into the apartment. I didn't turn on the lights. The gloom felt right. It felt honest. The hum was there. VMMMMMMMMM. It felt different now. It no longer felt menacing or intrusive. It just felt present. A fact, like my own heartbeat, it had been waiting for me. I knew it had. It knew I would be back, and it knew I would be alone. I walked past the kitchen into the small closet by the door where I kept a small, red metal toolbox. I opened it. Inside, amongst a hammer and some screwdrivers and a wrench I'd never used, was a small pry bar. It was about a foot long, solid steel, with a curved claw at one end. Meant for pulling up nails or floorboards. My fingers closed around its cool, heavy weight. I walked into the living room and sat on the floor, my back against the sofa, facing the corner. The smell was thick in the twilight. The vibration was a steady, patient pulse under my feet. The first fat drops of rain began to slap against the window pane. I sat there in the growing darkness, the pry bar held tight in my lap. I didn't know what I was going to do. I only knew that the time for asking for help was over. The time for listening was over. This was my sanctuary. This was my mind, and there was only one way to take them back. The hum pulsed. Thrum, thrum, like a heart, waiting. I sat there in the dark for I don't know how long. Time had sort of melted. The only clock was the growing storm outside and the steady, thrumming pulse beneath my feet. The first clap of thunder wasn't distant anymore. It was right overhead, a deep, rattling crack that shook the old window frames in their sockets. Rain wasn't just slapping against the glass now, it was a solid sheet of water, a liquid wall that cut me off from the rest of the world. It felt fitting. I was already cut off. The world outside, the world where my sister was probably still sitting in that bright coffee shop, worrying about my mental health, felt like a foreign country. This apartment, this dark, humming room, was my world now. The pry bar was cold and heavy in my lap. I ran my thumb over the smooth, worn steel. It felt like the only real thing in the room. A simple tool for a simple job. But the job wasn't simple, was it? My brain was scrambling, trying to find a rational explanation, a last-ditch effort to pull me back from the brink. It's just old pipes. It's an overloaded transformer in the basement. It's a refrigerator on the fritz in the apartment below. But there was no apartment below. There was just the ground. Just the dirt and foundation and whatever secrets this old building was sitting on. The hum knew. It pulsed with a kind of smug patience. Thrum, thrum. It knew I had no one left to run to. Then, a flash of lightning lit up the entire apartment in a stark, blue-white negative. For 1/10 of a second, I saw everything with perfect, unnatural clarity. The scuff marks on the floor, the outline of the sofa, the dust motes hanging in the air. It was followed an instant later by a deafening crash of thunder, so loud and so close it felt like the sky was being ripped in half right on top of the roof. And in that same instant, everything went black. Not the gloomy twilight I'd been sitting in. This was a deep, absolute black. All at once, the low buzz from the digital clock on the microwave, the faint whine of the refrigerator compressor, the hum of the wireless router, every tiny, ambient sound that made up the white noise of a home, died. The silence they left behind was staggering. It was thick and suffocating, a physical weight on my eardrums. I held my breath, listening. The rain was still a roar outside, but inside, there was only one sound left. VMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMMM It wasn't just a hum anymore. It was a clear, resonant tone, low G sharp that vibrated up through the floor, through the soles of my feet, up my spine, and settled in the base of my skull. It wasn't just a sound I was hearing, or what was left of my ability to hear. It was a pressure, a physical presence that filled the void left by the power cut. And it was coming from that corner, the corner that smelled of rot and damp earth. It was so loud now, so undeniable. In the pitch black, it felt like the building's true voice had finally been allowed to speak. Something inside me snapped. It wasn't a choice anymore. It wasn't a plan. It was just an animal need to see, to know. The debate was over. The jury of one, me, had reached its verdict. Crazy or not, I was going to look. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped my phone. I fumbled with it, swiping up on the screen until the little flashlight icon appeared. I stabbed at it with my thumb. A bright, cold beam of LED light shot out, cutting a perfect, clean cone through the oppressive darkness. It felt like I'd just created a sun. The sudden light made my eyes ache. I pointed it at the floor. I got onto my hands and knees, my joints cracking in protest. The pry bar felt heavier now, more significant. I crawled over to the corner, the beam of my phone dancing wildly in front of me, illuminating the dusty floorboards. The smell was overpowering here. It was a thick, gag-inducing stench of mildew, spoiled food, and something else, something metallic and vaguely sweet, like old blood. My stomach heaved. I wedged the pry bar into the thin crack between two of the planks. The same planks the landlord had tapped with his foot. Solid as a rock, he'd said. Liar. I put my weight on the bar. The old wood groaned in protest but didn't budge. My breath was coming in ragged, shallow gasps. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. Adrenaline, pure and hot, flooded my veins. Come on, I whispered, my voice a broken rasp. I readjusted the bar, got a better angle, and threw my entire body into it. There was a sound, a sharp, splintering crack. The nail head pulled free with a screech of tortured metal. A gap opened up, a sliver of blackness. The foul air that puffed out was so concentrated it was almost visible, a wave of stench that made me jerk my head back. I coughed, my eyes watering. But I wasn't stopping. I was too far gone. I jammed the claw of the bar into the new opening and heaved again. Crack. Another nail gave way. I worked my way down the board, my movements frantic and clumsy. The light from my phone, propped up against the wall, was my only guide. Crack. Screech. Crack. My knuckles were raw. Sweat dripped into my eyes. Finally, with one last, desperate shove, the entire plank gave way. It ripped free from its last nail and flipped over with a loud clatter, revealing a rectangle of perfect, yawning blackness beneath. The smell that rose from that hole was a living thing. It was a physical assault. I scrambled back, pressing the back of my hand against my mouth and nose, bile rising in my throat. It was the smell of a tomb. The smell of things left to rot in the dark for a very, very long time. For a moment, I just stared into the void, my light shaking. My mind refused to process it. It was just a hole. A crawl space. That's all. Old buildings have them. It's for pipes. It's for wiring. My sister's voice, so reasonable, so pitying, echoed in my head. Your brain is building a narrative, and so I had to see the narrative. I had to know. I took a shaky breath, the foul air searing my lungs, and leaned forward. I aimed the cone of light down into the opening. The beam cut through the darkness and landed on something. My brain couldn't make sense of it at first. It was just a pale shape amid a nest of what looked like old rags, plastic bags, and crumpled food wrappers. It took a second for the shape to resolve itself, for my mind to accept the impossible thing my eyes were seeing. It was a person. He was lying curled on his side in the narrow space between the dirt floor and the beams that held up my apartment. He was skeletal, so thin his bones seemed to press against his filthy, sallow skin. His hair was a matted, greasy mess, and his clothes were little more than dark, tattered rags. He was lying perfectly still. My first thought, a wild, hopeful spike of terror, was that he was dead. A body, a corpse that had been rotting under my floor. It was a horrifying thought, but somehow, it was better than the alternative. Then, he moved. Slowly, so slowly, he uncurled. He rolled onto his back, his movements languid, like a man waking from a long nap. He didn't seem startled by the light. He didn't flinch. He just adjusted. He brought his head up, and his face turned towards the opening. Towards my light. Towards me. My heart didn't just stop. It felt like it had been surgically removed from my chest. His eyes were wide open. In the harsh glare of the LED, the pupils were tiny black dots in vast, milky white orbs. They were in shadow, fixed on me. And then, his lips, chapped and pale, parted. He didn't say anything. He didn't scream or gasp or show any sign of fear at being discovered. He just looked right at me, slowly lifted one long, dirt-caked finger, and pressed it to his lips in a universal sign. Shish. And then, his mouth stretched. It pulled wide into a hideous, unnatural grin. It was a smile that held no humor, no warmth, no humanity. It was the vacant, disconnected smile of a predator that knows the trap has finally sprung. My breath caught in my throat. A scream was building there, a raw, primal thing, but it wouldn't come out. I was paralyzed, pinned in place by that terrible, silent grin. He began to move, his body slithering through the filth of his nest. He wasn't crawling like a person. He was writhing like a snake, pulling himself forward with his elbows and hips, his eyes never leaving mine. He was coming towards the hole. He was coming for me. Time slowed to a crawl. The only sound in the universe was the slick, rustling sound of his body moving through the debris below and the frantic, useless hammering of my own heart. He reached the opening. A hand came up through the darkness. The fingers were long and thin, the nails black with filth. The hand shot forward with impossible speed, and a cold, grimy grip clamped around my ankle. For a second there was no sound except for the storm and the blood roaring in my ears. And then a scream, a real one, finally tore its way out of my throat. It wasn't a movie scream. It was an ugly, ragged, tearing sound, the sound of an animal caught in a trap. My whole body went into some kind of primal autopilot. I wasn't thinking. There were no thoughts. There was only the cold, filthy grip on my ankle and the horrifying, grinning face framed in the hole in my floor. My free leg shot out, a desperate, flailing kick aimed at nothing and everything. My heel connected with something soft and wet. There was a grunt from below, a sound of pained surprise, and the grip on my ankle loosened for just an instant. It was all I needed. I yanked my leg back with a sob, scraping the skin raw against the edge of the splintered floorboard. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I scrambled backwards on my hands and knees, my palms slick with sweat and grime on the dusty wood. He was going to come out of the hole. I knew it. Any second, I'd feel that hand on me again. The crawl to the door felt like a mile. My phone, which had been propped against the wall, fell over with a clatter, its beam now pointing uselessly at the ceiling, plunging the corner back into darkness. It didn't matter. The image of that face, that ghastly smile, was burned onto the inside of my eyelids. The smell followed me, a foul cloud of rot and spoiled earth. My breath came in choked, hiccuping gasps. The front door. I reached it, my body shaking so violently my teeth were chattering. My fingers were like clumsy, useless sausages. I fumbled for the deadbolt. My thumb slipped off the turn knob. Come on, I whimpered, a frantic prayer to no one. I tried again, using both hands, jamming my thumb against the cold metal and twisting with all my might. It gave way with a heavy, metallic thunk. The sound was deafening in the charged silence. I pawed at the doorknob, turned it, and threw myself into the hallway, collapsing against the opposite wall. I landed in a heap on the threadbare carpet of the corridor, the door swinging shut behind me with a soft click. The hallway was almost as dark as my apartment, lit only by a single, grimy emergency light at the far end that cast long, distorted shadows. But it was safe. It felt safe. I curled into a ball, wrapped my arms around my knees, and just screamed. I kept screaming until my throat was raw, hoping someone, anyone, would hear me over the roar of the rain and thunder. A door down the hall creaked open. A sliver of yellow light cut through the gloom. Hello? Is someone out there? It was a man's voice, groggy and annoyed. Help me, I cried, my voice cracking. Please, God, help me. There's someone in my apartment. The slice of light widened. A man in a bathrobe, Mr. Henderson from 3C, peered out. His look of annoyance vanished the second he saw me huddled on the floor. Jesus Christ, he muttered. He didn't come closer. Instead, he ducked back inside his apartment. For a horrible second, I thought he'd shut the door, abandoned me. But then I heard his muffled voice, sharp and urgent. Yeah, I need the police. 1420 Ambrose Street, apartment 1A. There's a woman in the hall, says there's an intruder. I just stayed there, shivering, listening to the muffled sound of his voice on the phone and the thunder outside. It was all a blur. Time got syrupy and slow. I don't know how long I sat there before I heard the new sounds. Heavy footsteps on the stairs. The click-clack of gear. Voices, calm and professional, cutting through the chaos of the storm. Ma'am? Police. Can you tell us what happened? A flashlight beam hit my face and I flinched. Two uniformed officers were standing over me. One was older, with a graying mustache and tired eyes. The other was younger, looking alert and tense. I tried to speak, but all that came out was a stutter. I just pointed a trembling finger at my apartment door. He's in there, I managed to whisper. Under the floor. The look they exchanged wasn't one of disbelief. It was something else, a kind of weary professionalism. The older one knelt down, keeping a respectful distance. Okay, we're going to go in. I want you to stay right here with my partner, all right? I nodded, unable to do anything else. More officers arrived. They were quiet, efficient. They talked in low voices on their radios. They took up positions. Then, with a quiet command, two of them pushed my door open and went inside, guns drawn. I sat there, wrapped in a blanket someone had given me, staring at the open doorway of my own apartment, which now felt like a portal to some other, terrible world. The younger officer stayed with me, asking me questions in a low, calming voice. My name, how long had I lived here, did I see the person's face? My answers were short, disjointed. I couldn't stop seeing that smile. After what felt like an eternity, the older officer came back out. His face was grim. He's gone, ma'am, he said. He had a notepad in his hand. There's a crawl space, just like you said. He pried up a section of ductwork in the back. Leads straight down into the building's main basement and out through a service exit. He could be anywhere by now. Gone. The relief was so immense it almost made me sick. We found where he was, living, the officer continued, his voice tight with a disgust he couldn't quite hide. It's a mess. Food wrappers, bottles. He's been down there for a while. I just stared at him, numb. Living under my feet. All this time, the humming, the whispers. It wasn't my dying ears. It wasn't my mind playing tricks on me. It was him. Another detective, a man in a rumpled suit, came out of the apartment. He was holding a plastic evidence bag. Inside it was a small, spiral-bound notebook. It was filthy, the cover warped and stained. He came over and knelt beside the first officer. "Anne, my name is Detective Miller," he said, his voice gentle. "We found this in his nest. We think it belongs to him. I have to ask, do you recognize it?" I shook my head, my eyes fixed on the grimy object. He sighed. He looked at the other officer, then back at me. "I'm going to read you a few entries, okay? I need to know if this makes any sense to you." I nodded numbly. He carefully opened the notebook, its damp pages crinkling under his touch. "All right," he started, his voice flat. He read from the page. October 14th, 7:15 a.m., water pipes running, showering, 8:02 a.m. Front door opens and closes. She's left, 1:12 p.m., keyboard clicks, steady rhythm, working, 6:47 p.m., microwave hums, footsteps back and forth, kitchen to living room, making dinner, 11:32 p.m., light switch clicks off, bed springs creak, breathing slows, asleep. A cold, creeping numbness started at the base of my spine and spread through my entire body. It was colder than the fear had been. It was my life. My boring, private, mundane life, chronicled by the sound it made through a layer of wood. Every shower, every meal, every keystroke. He had been listening to everything. The humming wasn't just him moving around. He was listening. "There's pages of this," Detective Miller said, his voice strained. "Every day, detailed notes on your entire schedule, all based on sound." The world began to tilt. The sounds of the hallway, the cops' radios, the rain, all of it started to fade, replaced by a roaring in my ears that was far worse than any tinnitus. He wasn't just some homeless person who found a place to hide. This was something else. This was deliberate. My whole life had been reduced to a series of audio cues for a monster living under my floor. The isolation I'd felt, the fear that I was losing my mind, the pity in my sister's eyes, he had orchestrated all of it. He'd created my own private hell and had been listening to me suffer in it. The detective flipped to the very last page. The writing was different here. It was a messy, excited scrawl. He hesitated for a moment, looking at me with an expression of profound pity. "What is it?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. "What does it say?" He took a deep breath and read the last entry. "Experiment successful. Hearing loss is progressing, but she can perceive the 40 Hz frequency. The whispered words through the floor joists are having a psychological effect. She's starting to react. She's listening." He closed the notebook. The words just hung there in the air. Experiment successful. She's listening. The humming, the low, thrumming vibration that had become the soundtrack to my descent into madness. It wasn't random noise from the building. It wasn't a product of my failing senses. It was a signal, a frequency, a tool he was using to tune into my head as the rest of the world faded out. The whispered words I thought I'd imagined, down here, they were real. He was talking to me. He was testing me. I wasn't just a person he was hiding from. I was a project. I sat there on the cold floor of the hallway, a police blanket around my shoulders, and the true horror of it all finally crashed down. It wasn't about the man under the floor. It was about the man who had found a way inside my head. The one place I thought was my own, my fading world of sound, had been his playground all along. And the most terrifying part, the part that will haunt me until the day I die, wasn't the man himself. It was the simple, sickening realization that he was right. I had been listening.